Well, hi. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm going to start by just telling you a story because I love stories. So a few years ago, I went morel hunting with my friend Glenn, and he is a really weird dude. Glenn is in his 50s. He's probably about 5'2". He's been a vegan since way before it was cool, and he's also a musician, just like myself. He runs a recording studio, and he hunts mushrooms on the weekends in Grand Rapids. Sometimes he sells the extra stuff that he finds, but usually you can find him just like trading mushrooms for a good meal at a nice restaurant. Uh, I love hunting with Glenn because he giggles anytime he finds a mushroom. He's just unable to contain his joy. And the thing about Glenn is that he always finds the Morchella angusta seps, the black morels, before I can spot them. So even when I'm sitting in exactly the right spot with my face like inches from the ground and I'm scanning the landscape like a satellite, he always finds mushrooms that I've missed. And sometimes it's literally like inches away from my face. So when I first expressed my frustration to Glenn about not being able to spot them and the fact that he's so good at it, he just laughed at me. And he said, you have to think like a mushroom. You're only looking on one side of the road. You're only looking in the spots that are easy to see. And you're missing all the best ones because you're thinking like a person. Mushrooms travel different roads than people do. And if you keep looking, you'll see the paths that the mushrooms are taking. And they don't resemble our paths at all. So it was kind of Glenn's way of saying, you need to think outside the box. So I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about what I do. I'm currently in a PhD program at the University of Virginia. I'm actually at the university right now. I ducked out of class early to come hang out with you guys. And glad I did because I got to hear some cool stuff. But just by way of introduction, I'm in the Music Composition and Computer Technologies program here at UVA, and my research involves the development of immersive experiences that let people interact with and communicate with the natural world through art, with the goal of improving scientific literacy, personal responsibility for nature, and just like natural entanglements. So I kind of wear a lot of hats. My professional life's really messy. So I'm a composer. I'm an artist, a visual artist. I'm a forager, which is probably the only thing that any of you may even possibly know me for. I'm an accidental social media content creator. I'm an author. Actually, today I finished the first draft of my first book, which is really good because it's due today. Leave it to me to leave things to the last minute. I'm also what I call a creative alchemist. I don't do real magic, although that does look very cool. I try to combine things in order to make the kind of art that I want to experience. So I graduated in 2014 with my bachelor's in music composition from Butler University, then went on and got my master's from Western Michigan University, and I started my PhD in music composition and computer technologies last year. And when I was in undergrad, I had a great time. I learned a lot. It was very structured, very traditional music, but when I left, I felt pretty disillusioned. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a composer, or at least I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a composer like the ones that I was being exposed to in undergrad. Because I really liked writing music, but it didn't feel like I had been given quite enough ways to be creative. Like I'd been given this blank paper and a pencil, but I didn't have any markers, so I couldn't add any color. I had a lot of different interests in different topics, but I really believed, because I had been told, that if I was going to be a real composer, like a great and brilliant composer, then I had to let go of a lot of stuff. And I wasn't a bad composer. I was a pretty good one, but I wasn't going to be great. So like not like this, not in two dimensions. So trying to be a musician separate from all these other interests was kind of like putting on underwear that was a little bit too tight and trying to get through the day without really thinking about it. And honestly, I've never really been good at doing just one thing at a time. My creative life has always been a little chaotic. So this week I actually went around and I took some pictures of the workspaces that I've put together in my house. And I found all this stuff. I have audio equipment and mushrooms and paint and welding gear and fermentation experiments, these graphic scores, instruments. There's a microscope in there. There's even a cat, because no workspace is complete without Felis domesticus. So in 2016, after a couple years of not really writing very much and being kind of worried that I wasn't ever going to really get back into writing, I decided to apply for an artist residency in Northern Iceland over the winter. So I chose not to apply as a composer. I decided I would apply as a multimedia artist. I didn't want to be forced to compose, and I didn't know if that was really something I wanted to do anymore, so I left my options really open. Quit my job, moved to Iceland for 3 months, and started working on this idea. So I decided I wanted to try my hand at installation. I wanted to do something with sound. I wanted to be interactive. I was looking for something that was really sensory. I'd never done an installation before, but I knew that it was a good opportunity to try something that had a really high potential of failure, but in a really low stakes setting, because Iceland isn't exactly known for its giant population. So I figured if I made a huge mess of things, then I could just ghost everyone after the event. And that was way better than failing in front of everybody I knew, and especially everybody who knew how much debt I was in from my first music degree. So I wanted to play with materials from the environment, not just the things that had a clear sound to them, like a rock hit with a stick, but stuff that would enhance the overall experience of the work across a lot of different senses. So I started building this installation inspired by the stuff that I saw around me. Black sand beaches, fishing nets, metal, lava rock, geodesic domes at the geothermal plants. And so I started making this piece called Between the Flows. So the thing that I built was a geodesic dome. It was built from a hubs kit and some pine sticks. It was about 5 meters high at the center. It was pretty cool. I got to learn how to use power tools. It was not the last time that I would be using power tools. I collected a bunch of black sand and all these natural and discarded objects from the beach, which I arranged in a crescent shape at the base of the dome. I also learned how to do some string art so that I could mimic the shape of the fishermen's nets. I started recording audio everywhere that I went, building up this library of sounds from this little town that I was living in. My Zoom recorder got a major workout during my time in Iceland. So I designed the work so that it could be experienced from the inside instead of people looking at it like an audience looks at a performer. So I wanted people to play. I wanted them to touch things and curate their own experience based on whatever the mood struck. So as you can see, a lot of people could fit inside. It has a pretty large floor area. And the title referred to this little town, Ólafsfjörður's relative position to the Arctic Circle and to Iceland's felt experience of climate change. I would show you a clip, but unfortunately it does not seem like it wants to play. So something else that I started working on that would kind of eventually evolve into a lot of what I'm doing now was graphic scoring. So there were a lot of artists at this residency. Almost all of them were visual artists. So the studios were really not set up for musicians. Music was very much an afterthought. So I decided that I would work on a piece of visual music inspired by the Aurora Borealis as a side project while I was procrastinating from fixing all of the problems that came up with my installation. And the result is the piece that you see on your screen now. Watercolor ink. I was really interested in how things connected to each other like stars in the sky. And I really felt like this way of making things would give me a lot more freedom to explore my ideas and could potentially give something new to a performer who was maybe as tired of the same old as I was. So after returning from Iceland with this whole new toolkit and all these ideas, I decided that I wasn't really much of a composer so much as I was an alchemist. I was trying to transform things and change the reference points of things But instead of trying to transform stuff into gold, I was really interested in acquiring new skills and turning them into like a single cohesive output. So instead of worrying about how I would justify what I was doing as composition, I just decided that I was going to let these ideas play themselves out. And eventually I might find my way back to sound. So really, it got me thinking about something that I've heard one of my favorite composers, Mark Applebaum, say more than once, which is that I'm tired of music. So the idea of the performer and the composer and the audience is that there's this hierarchy, and the composer is making all these decisions, and then the performer gets to make fewer decisions, and then the audience just kind of gets to listen and decide what they think of it at the end. But I was really interested in what it might mean to embrace a sense of creative equality, where everybody got to help create music. And that's when I started working on these pieces. So I started thinking about more than just the relationships between people. It also kind of started to shape how I saw other relationships, like the ones between plants and fungi and other members of the animal kingdom. And so what could it mean to bake that idea of equality of personhood into the scores I was writing? So this piece came from a single thought, which was, if a fungus could write music for humans to play, what would it look like? So the piece you're seeing on your screen is my interpretation of the kind of music that a fungus would write about itself if it were introducing itself to a person. It was played by my friend Ashley Walters, who's a cellist, and then I followed it up with a video response where I tried to guess where she was working in the score, and we're gonna see if it will let me play it. I don't think it will. No, it doesn't look like it will. I can send a link later on, but this is kind of the point in the presentation where we finally get to the mushrooms, right? Mycelium, everything is all over the place all the time. So because work like this isn't standardized the way that traditional notation is, I had to make a few decisions that would ensure that the player had some general ideas to guide their interpretation of the score. And so because my scores are inspired by, and in some cases really based on, the function and shape of mycelium networks, with objects in the score kind of behaving like fruiting bodies, so you can see these points of arrival here. And then all of these little hyphal connections that are binding them together. I had to kind of create a lexicon that would hold consistently through the works so that people could actually play them and not be totally confused. So the main rules are that you have to maintain internal consistency. So if you play something one way, you have to play it that same way again if you perform it again in that same performance. And then you have to move in a way that makes sense, kind of like hyphae all move in a direction, sometimes many directions. And if you were to dig in the ground and find a single hyphal thread, you could follow it to a conclusion. But I really wanted that sense of things happening under the surface and there being a sense of order, even though everything looked really chaotic. This score is written for guitar, and the black lines imitate the rhizomorphs of a honey mushroom digging underneath tree bark. So I used color here to draw the eye to specific objects, again, kind of like fruiting bodies, which you can kind of interpret as moments of arrival within the music. So just like mycelium, we're not reading left to right. Nobody's telling you where to start or to end. You can start wherever you like and you can stop wherever you like, as long as you follow those threads that lead you to an object. And so the color and density and the gradient and contrast and the size of an object can help the player to determine how they want to interpret the work. You know, the concern with a graphic score is always like, can we determine success? Like, what does a successful or virtuosic performance look like? And the score kind of has to have this clear idea. And so we're kind of always asking ourselves the question, like, are we passing the buck to performers and not taking responsibility for what we're doing? Or are we giving the performer an opportunity to be more creative themselves, you know? So let me scoot on here. And I guess that for me and what I like to make, it's not that I'm not interested in precision, because I am interested in precision, but I think I'm interested in a different kind of precision, which leads me to deep ecology. So in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, I moved from Indianapolis to Michigan to start my master's degree. And the deep ecology project came about because I'd started making all these videos for social media about the one hyperfixation that makes me super annoying at parties, which I'm sure some of you can relate to, foraging and mycology. People, it's really fun to watch people's eyes glaze over when you start yapping binomials at them. But within a few months of making content just for fun to alleviate my pandemic boredom, I had amassed all these followers, and I don't think that that ever could have happened in another time. You know, the pandemic, especially the beginning of the pandemic, was a really interesting and kind of special time to become a content creator. But here I was, like, making content for people, and like all these people were watching it, and I was just being enthusiastic and weird in front of a camera. So the social media stuff got really overwhelming. I was doing all of these things that were adjacent to the social media. I felt all this pressure to continue making videos. You know, I signed a book deal. I was talking about doing a TV show, and I used to joke that I was kind of getting famous for the wrong thing. Although, to be fair, social media famous is fake famous. It's not real famous. So at this point, I had these two parallel careers going, and I had no idea how I was going to reconcile them. You know, most of my social media followers had no idea that I was an artist. They just saw me as that like cringy, nerdy person who wouldn't shut up about mushrooms. So it occurred to me that I could use my experience as a multimedia artist and as a composer to create sonic experiences that could also act as teaching tools, because I'd really fallen in love with teaching by making this content. The idea isn't new. I mean, artists have been making work about nature for centuries. Beethoven wrote pastoral works, Van Gogh painted the countryside, and even now we have artists like Andy Goldsworthy on the left who only use nature to make art. And I want to be really careful how I say this, but it's been said before that art is the lie that tells the truth. I think it was Picasso who said that. And all that really means is that art helps to reveal true things by telling us stories and suspending our disbelief. And it can also be said, kind of on the other side of the coin, that science is the quest for truth, but it doesn't always communicate its findings very elegantly or effectively. And so when artists talk science, they often get it very, very badly wrong. And then when scientists try to use art, sometimes it comes off as like pretty cheesy and ineffective. And so I decided that I wanted to try to do both because, you know, the hubris of man. I wanted to use the ability that I had to speak the language of art and the language of science to create these experiences that would communicate some of the things that I thought were the most important lessons that I've learned about food, ecology, the environment. So in 2021, I started working on this idea for a dinner, and I spent 2 weeks foraging, scripting, testing all these recipes, collecting field recordings, pulling local ecological data, and basically just compiling everything together in this 9-course forage dinner, which I served to a small audience over the course of about an hour and a half with all of these musical tracks and spoken word. And each of those tracks corresponded to a different course of the dinner. So I ended up doing that piece again at United Plant Savers in Ohio the following summer. And I'm going to keep doing it as long as people will continue letting me to like come and perform it. But the goal of the project kind of sparked a turn for me in my career. I really wanted to bring people into relationship with nature as part of nature and highlight some of the ephemerality of our food and ecosystems by interpreting and communicating actual scientific evidence. But at the same time, like reach the emotional center of participants by teaching about all of this lost community knowledge and sufficiency that we have in our own backyards, you know, all of this knowledge that used to be common knowledge that we're now having to rebuild. So I, again, would show you a clip, but for whatever reason, this does not seem interested in letting me play things. But it's essentially just a small video that I made that talks about the process. So I've already described it to you, so I guess you can kind of figure that out. So in my work, I really like to focus on shifting perspectives and identifying new ways that people and non-human neighbors can communicate with each other. As Merlin Sheldrake, who I'm sure you all know and love as much as I do, talks about in his book, Entangled Life, we often frame fungi and similar organisms as like kind of brainless and a word that I really hate, which is primitive. But what if it's not actually about an intellectual hierarchy, but instead it's a linguistic challenge that we can overcome through different kinds of listening and different kinds of understanding? It's one thing to imagine what a mushroom might say or how a mushroom might introduce itself, but it's another to try to set up a line of communication with it. And that leads us to fungal chapel. This was my thesis project for my master's. I finished it in 2022, and it was probably one of the more ambitious projects that I've attempted in the past few years, if not only for the sheer number of new skills I had to learn in order to pull it off. So it's an interactive outdoor installation work exploring the ties between people and place through the deconstructed visual language of a church. It also kind of vibes with the idea that nature can be something like a church. So visitors are encouraged to interact on these different levels of physical touch and consciousness. There are different activities that are done. And most of the objects in the chapel are sounding sculptures. So they're hooked up to contact microphones with effects, and they can produce all of these musical sounds. So there's like a guided ritual, and the point is that visitors are just given space to reflect and participate in those rituals of reciprocity and to experience some kinship with their environment. So here are a few of the things that I picked up. I learned how to weld. I'm still not good, but I like doing it. I learned some woodworking, some metalworking, bushcrafting, lasers. I didn't actually get a picture of me using lasers, but I did use a laser to cut those plexi sheets. And I also started playing with biodata sonification technology. You guys might have heard of a device called a plant wave, which is basically like a polygraph for plants. The device translates the electrical impulses that are generated by the mycelium or by the fruiting bodies, and it converts them into MIDI, which is a type of musical computer language. And then I can take that input and I can have it play different instruments in a digital audio workstation. If you know what GarageBand is, that's a digital audio workstation. And so the piece is designed to be added to over time. Visitors write their thoughts and meditations in a book that remains part of the installation forever, but they also add physical objects from the environment by offering gifts to one of the sculptures. And the gifts are never removed, and they just become part of the ecosystem of the installation. And it also just means that I have a plastic box of moss, acorns, trash, rocks, pine cones, and walnuts sitting in my basement until the end of time, but really that's nothing new. My most recent projects are, I did a collaboration with Carter Rice, who's a professor at Western Michigan University, and he's been really interested in animation. Asked if I would collaborate with him on a project that involved animating some of my drawings and both of us writing music based on the interpretations. And here's a clip of sort of some of what he was able to accomplish. I don't know why this one's auto playing and the others won't, but you might recognize some of those images. The passion flower, we have mycelium, we have a leaf skeleton, a lot of different things. So in June of this year, I traveled to Alice Holt Forest in the UK as part of a summer program called Sensing the Forest. And for this installation, which is called Tread Lightly, I made a walking labyrinth out of found objects in the forest and rigged it with floor sensors that pick up vibrations and ultrasonic distance sensors that are triggered when you get close to them. So when those sensors are triggered, audio clips play at different rates and pitches depending on how heavy the person's footfalls are and how close they get to the sensors and how quickly they're moving. So in the center, I sonified a rotten log, signifying the perpetual sound of the forest when we're not in it, and then the human becomes part of the forest ecosystem through their movements. I've also traveled around the new versions of the fungal shampoo technology. I added some live visuals to certain iterations of the installation to reinforce the immediacy of our interactions with the fungi and their responses to our input. So in this installation in Indianapolis, the human is actually creating a circuit with the mushroom by holding a clip in one hand and touching the mushroom with the other. And so you can listen to just the mushroom, or you can listen to the mushroom plus you. You're adding your own physical frequencies to the soundscape being produced by the electronic signals from the fungi. So thinking like a fungus kind of just lets us come to the table with more. It makes us more collaborative, more resilient, more capable of seeing the big picture of everything around us. You know, I think often about how fungi eat death and then they turn it back into life and they regenerate the world around them. Fungi are generous. They're community-oriented survivors. They exist in this liminal space between life and death. And I think that like my life and my career thus far are just kind of proof that these sorts of entanglements really enrich us. They don't just make us more interesting or more obnoxious at parties. They feed back really positively into all these different aspects of our lives. And so by approaching the world around us with the interconnected perspective of a fungus, we can be creative in really fantastic new ways. And I just love this quote from Mark Applebaum, which is, why sound like me? If you sound like me, then everyone who plays this piece will sound like me. And that makes one piece. Whereas I want this provocation, this impetus to sound like many pieces. And besides, I'm bored of me. I need less me in my life, not more. I could stand a little bit of you or a lot of you. So thank you very much.